Hello everyone, my name is Kelvin. Okay, let's start today with the analysis about the game of the month from Tunnelvision tournament, okay, in Columbia Chess Club. This is in South Carolina. And let's begin with this game between the Christopher STINECIPHER, I think, against CARSON NORTON. So for me, I think this is the best game of the tournament in the edition from January 2026. So let's start with this idea immediately. It's d4, knight f6, c4, c5, okay, and e3. E3, I don't like this too much normally because it's not flexible. Here, it's much better to play, for example, pawn on d5, okay? And with the pawn on d5, the black can continue with the pawn on e6 using a Benoni defense. Or they can use b5 using the Benko gambit. So this is a very good option. Or other option, more flexible, is to play the knight on f3. With the knight on f3, we can transpose to different systems. For example, if he capture, and for example, pawn b6, f3, c4, e4, and we are playing in the Maroczy bind with white, and the black can play with the queen gambit, with the queen Indian, or with the hedgehog structure. Okay, this is a very interesting position where the black will have a very good develop, the white has stronger center, and that's it. It's not complicated line. So the other idea is e3. After e3, this was the move used in the game, pawn g6, the black is trying to use this Benoni defense, and in this Benoni defense, knight f3, bishop g7, bishop e2, short castle, and c takes d4. C takes d4 is an interesting idea. Instead, c takes d4, other possibility here, we have different possibilities, okay? So, for example, if we play b6, the idea is to develop the bishop on b7, okay? The knight on d7, and the pawn on d6. When the bishop is on b7, the black is using the double fianchetto, and this is a good position for black. What's the problem when the black is playing b6 in this position? Because the white can play d5. In the future, it's like knight c3, okay, and after bishop to b7, simple d5, and with this d5, d6, a4, this position is complicated because this bishop shouldn't be here. Now this is like the Benoni defense where this bishop normally is developed on g4, because when the bishop is on b7 or is on a6, is playing against a pawn chain, and it's like the bishop is a bad piece in the beginning, okay. So this is not good for black. But the other idea is to play capture on d4. This is the best option if they want to play with the pawn on d5, with the bishop on b7, Because after this, pawn capture d4, and now bishop to b7. And for example, if they play h3, a regular move, so we can play d6 and develop the knight on d7, okay? So after bishop e3, knight b d7, a6, queen c7, and this position is similar to the hedgehog structure. But the difference is that the black is using the double fianchetto, okay? But it's not, if the white tried to use similar idea that I explained before, now it's different because this square is free. So if this square is free, we can use, for example, a5 and moving the knight throughout a6 and c5, okay? So this is a very good idea for black, or even it's possible to play the pawn on d6, the knight b d7, and knight c5, but in all the cases will be necessary to play with the pawn on a5 to avoid b4, okay? So this is a regular idea. It's popular in the King Indian defense. So we can say that the black is playing a King Indian structure, okay? So other idea possible is to play the pawn on d6 immediately, but after the pawn on d6 here, the white can play in two ways. If the white play, for example, d5, the black can try, for example, the Benko gambit with the pawn on b5, and after pawn capture a6, okay? This is typical, many players play that. So for example, if you capture bishop take, and the idea is to develop the knight here, queen here, rook f to b8, attacking against b2, and attacking against a2, okay? So this position is very good for black in many games. Instead d5 or b5, other idea that the black can play is the pawn on e6 and playing the Benoni defense. So after this, knight c3, pawn capture, a6, a4, and now it's like the white is playing with the pawn on e3, but technically in this position it's necessary to have the pawn on e4 because the pawn on e4 is protecting the pawn on d5 and it's allowing the develop of the bishop, and it's possible to try break the position with the pawn on e5, okay? So this is the regular plan in the Benoni defense. Instead, well, b5 is the possible option. Instead d5, the other possibility is knight c3. When the knight goes on c3, now the black can decide between different options, but the most popular is to simply develop the knight on c6, okay? When the knight goes on c6, if the pawn goes to d5, the knight can go to a5, and it's possible to plan in the future to break the position with the pawn on b5. The problem with this knight is that it's like the knight is outside of the game for a long time. So even this is a problem. When I remember that I played this in the South Carolina Championship the past year, and I lost the game because my knight was out of the game many times, and my opponent played very well in this position. So instead that pawn b3 is other idea, and after pawn b3, simple d5. Okay, this is the good reaction in the center to try use this open diagonal in our favor. Okay, the problem with this move is that it's to get an equals position, and it's not, the black is not trying to win the game. Okay, it's to try keep the equilibrium in the position. And well, I think that if you would like to progress, it's necessary that you try to create a complicated game, and in the complicated game to use the tactical possibilities inside. So I think this is interesting. Instead, after this d5, for example, if knight takes d5, we can simplify, no? Capture, queen capture, and that's it. This pawn is pinned, and the white can simply play the bishop on b2, and this is good position for both. Or, if he played d takes e5 intermediate, we can play d takes e4. And after bishop takes e4, simple queen a5, and this pawn is hanging, and we will be taking the pawn. Or the other idea, it's queen capture d8, rook takes d8, and bishop takes e4, and now we have two options. The best option is knight e4, okay? Because knight e4, it's attacking in this diagonal, is winning the rook. But in this case, knight take e4 is an interesting possibility. Bishop take a1, b4. Now he cannot capture b4 because bishop d2 is attacking, is doing a double attack. So instead that bishop g7 and simple bishop d2 playing b5. The key in this position is that it's possible to consider this position like a sacrifice of the rook, because the white will have the possibility to play on the queen side with the majority pawn structure, because the white is playing with the pawn on a2, the pawn on b4, the pawn on c5, against the pawn on b7 and a7, and the bishop, the power of the two bishops are in that specific side. Imagine like we can try to move the rook on c1, pushing the pawn on a4, pushing the pawn on b5, okay, moving the bishop on b4, and we have some possibilities. Other way, it's to play with the knight g5, immediately attacking against f7, forcing this idea, and after this knight e4, the knight came back with similar plan. b4 here with bishop on d2, and then I will be using the d6 square. Okay, it's a little different because now this bishop on c8 is a bad piece, but the key is that it's possible to play this position perfectly. Okay. Other idea, if you don't want complicated line, is simple knight d7, bishop b2, knight takes e5, and this is easy. Okay, it's a good game for both, and the game is very easy. Instead that, in this position, other idea is to play d5 immediately. This is similar to the pawn on d6 and d5 later. So after take on d5, take on d4, queen capture, knight takes d5. When the queen is moved, e5, and the black is developing the position on the center. Okay, it's not a problem. This is good position for both. So in the game, the black prefer to capture on d4. Okay, it's good decision. I like this decision. And after e takes d4, simple d5 immediately. Okay, d5 is very interesting idea here, because now the black won't be trying to play system like Benoni defense or king India defense or something like that. No, They will be playing based in the concept. And the concept that the black use in this position is very easy to be played. And at the same time, it's not, the black won't be forced to take risk in the end game, okay, if they will be trying to get the victory. So after this d5, knight c3 and bishop g4, and now bishop e3. So what's the key? If the good move, and this is the critical position, because if you don't know what you are playing, the problem is that you don't know the possible tactics that you have in your favor, okay? So this is the reason, because when you are working in your openings or defenses, it's necessary that you analyze references games where you know how the grandmaster used that position, that specific position, which are the concepts that they explore in the position, or which are the possible plan that they follow in the position, the possible location of the pieces. So it's different, they are different hints that we can get from the references games. But it's necessary that you work in your position previously. In this position, the key is to play h3. And you say, okay, h3, it's complicated because h3 is attacking the bishop, but it's losing the pawn. But the truth is that the pawn is not lost. Because after, for example, bishop take f3 and capture on f3, it's not possible to capture the pawn on c4 because bishop take b7 is winning the rook. Okay, this is tactic behind that. Other idea is to play e6, but against e6, now the white can transfer this position, okay, since the queen gambit, because the white played d4 in c4, and they can transfer this position to pan of attack. The pan of attack is one attack used against the CARSON defense, okay? So after this, the white can play c5. That is very interesting, because now with the pawn on c5, the pawn on b2, and the pawn on a2, the white is creating a majority pawn structure that they can use on the queen side, okay? With that majority pawn structure, it's possible to create a pass pawn. And that pass pawn, the good condition of the pass pawn is that now the white has the power of the two bishops, okay? So then, this is a very interesting possibility, because in this way, it's very easy, the concept to play there. It's like rook b1, b4, b5, a45, and try to create a pass pawn there. So if the black play b6, simple b4, and after e5, knight a7, pawn capture, knight capture, and simple bishop d2 attacking, okay? Or if they prefer different line, like knight c6, we can play queen a4, and after queen a4, we are trading bishop e3 and b4, b5. And this position is very good to be played with white. Like knight d7, bishop e3, playing b4, b5. Then, instead bishop take f3, other idea is to move the bishop. And this is the complicated. So, this is the good move for white, the pawn on h3, and this is the good move for black, is to move the bishop back. But after this, the white has the possibility to play c5 again, and after knight c6, bishop to b5, this is the typical plan, because the white will be trading the bishop against the knight on c6, and in this way it is possible to play b4, b5, for example, okay? So then, after this, knight e4, so bishop f4, knight takes c3, pawn takes c3, queen a5, and queen b3, and this position is very good to be played with white, okay? The white is trading rook e1, attacking e6, attacking e7, so knight g5 attacking e6, and the bishop on b5 is taking on c6, forcing the black to capture with the pawn on b7, and we can generate initiative against the pawn on c6 in the future, for example, with the knight e5, okay? So the key is that here, h3, it's the good move for white, where the white is forcing the black to play in a complicated position, okay? Even if the black captured on f3, or if the black moved the bishop back. If after bishop g4, they played with the bishop on e3, and after bishop on e3, knight c6, okay? Instead knight c6, if they played bishop take f3 now, bishop take, and after e6, c take d5, now this is not good for black, because the white can get material advantage. After this knight capture, pawn capture d5, and queen b3. The queen on b3 is attacking d5, is attacking b7, and the bishop on f3 is attacking d5. So after knight c6, we can simply move the rook f to d1, protecting the pawn on d4 because he was attacking our isolated pawn, but now we are getting the pawn in our favor, okay, because we are taking the pawn on d5 or taking the pawn on b7. Instead that, for example, knight c6, and after knight c6, b3, okay, here it's I think it's the last opportunity for white to play with the pawn on c5, okay. After this pawn on c5, remember, to create this majority pawn structure, the black is forced to capture on f3, and after bishop capture on f3, e5 is an interesting possibility. They can play simple e6, is possible, and the white can simply move rook b1, b4, b5, a4, and blah, blah, blah. But the key is that the black can try an aggressive game to try get the equals possibilities in the game. After e5, opening the position. With the e5, d take e5, and now knight take e5. It's not possible to play this because pawn capture, and it's a winning position for black. For white, sorry. And after this knight capture d5, bishop takes d5, knight takes d5, knight takes d5, and knight c4. And the knight on c4 combined with the bishops are attacking against b2, and the knight is attacking the bishop on e3. So now rook c1, because it's not possible to defend b2. If he play b3, you can simply capture and moving the bishop back, or well, even after, sorry, it's my bad, because after b3 it's possible to capture here. Capture here, and bishop take a1. It's much better. But anyway, the rook c1, because it's not possible to defend the pawn on b2, the key is that it's forcing you to capture on e3. No. Okay, rook c1 attacking c4, and the knight on c4 is attacking against the bishop on e3. But after this, knight take e3, bishop take b2, rook c2, and queen capture d1, take on d1, and bishop g7, rook d7, and rook b8, planning the rook f to c8. With this simplification, this is okay. It's not complicated position for black, because the key in this position is that now the white has the isolated pawn on c5, isolated pawn on a2, and at the same time, the black is playing with the bishop and the rook against the rook and the knight. So normally the bishop and the rook is better combination than the bishop and the knight, okay? Theoretically. The other idea is that the white play b3, but after b3 the black play e6. It's okay. Other initiative that the black can do, it's simple knight e4, because after knight e4, knight takes d5, e6, and when the knight back on f4, knight e2, knight c3, attacking e2, and the pawn on d4 is attacked with many pieces, with the knight, with the bishop, with the queen, and at the same time, this bishop on g4 is spinning the knight on f3. So then when he moves the queen, capture, knight takes d4, this knight cannot capture because he's pinned, cannot capture because he's pinned, so bishop take d4, bishop take f3, attacking the queen, and after queen capture d4. And this position is good for both. Queen capture on b7 is not possible because the piece on d4 is hanging, and if he play rook d1, simple queen f6 is pinning the piece, and I don't know, it's ready to play e5 probably, or simple rook to d8, and the position is very good for both players, okay? Obviously, in the endgame, in that position, if the endgame is the knight and the queen against the queen and the bishop, that case is special because the knight and the queen is better than the bishop and the queen, okay, in the majority of the positions. But after b3, instead b3, the other idea is c5, bishop take f3, and e5. This is the past variation. So then b3, now e6, okay, and after this, rook c1. With the rook c1, okay, it's developing the rook, okay, it's moving the rook to different square because the bishop is attacking against a1, and now knight e4. With the knight e4, the knight on e4 is attacking, okay? For me, this is the good move because with this knight e4, the black is forcing the white to play in the critical concept in this game. The critical concept is the isolated pawn. So after this, c takes d5. If he play knight take e4, it's losing material, right? So pawn capture, knight here, bishop capture, knight takes d4, capture, queen capture d4, And after queen capture e4, queen d2 is winning a pawn. Or if he captured with the knight, simple rook f2, rook a to d8, then the position is very good because we are dominating the d file. We can move the queen in different directions, okay, and we are fighting in the open file. Instead knight take e4, he captured on d5, and after capture on d5, knight takes e3, rook takes e3, and queen captured on d5. And I would like to analyze this specific position especially, and this is the reason because I feel that this is the best game in that tournament, in that edition of the tournament, because the concept here is very clear and the black used the concept very, very well, okay? What happened? Let's remove all the pieces and let's analyze the pawn structure, okay? If we remove all the pieces, like in this position, it's exactly the same pawn structure, but the key is that when we have an isolated pawn, the problem with the isolated pawn, especially in the end game, it's because the pawn doesn't have the possibility to be protected with another pawn. So that means I cannot play e3 or c3 or e3 to defend the pawn on d4. What does that mean? That the white or the player with the isolated pawn will be forced to defend the pawn with other piece. But if the pieces are not present, in the end game, that pawn is a weak, okay? So, and we have different ways to recognize if the pawn is a weak or not. Is when we recognize the type of pieces that we have, okay? For example, if we are in one position like this, where we have the knight, the stronger knight blocking the isolated pawn, and the bishop is defending the isolated pawn, that means that that bishop who's defending the isolated pawn is the bad piece, because it will be located in the same color of the pawn. And the knight in the square in front of the isolated pawn is a very strong knight, because normally if the isolated pawn is in the center, the knight is centralized, and at the same time then I have the maximum movement possible, and at the same time the knight is working in the three sides, okay, on the king side, queen side, and on the center. So then this type of position is very good for the player against the isolated pawn, okay? When we go to the different position, this is other good position in favor of the player who is playing against the isolated pawn. So now the combination of the pieces, the relationship of the pieces, it's with the major pieces, okay? So with the rooks, with the queens, with the queen and the rooks. So in this way, the rooks are blocking the advance of the isolated pawn and the breaking option is present, okay? So this is the reason, because this position is very critical. The other, it's, for example, when we have more pieces. When we have more pieces, now the situation is completely different, because in this case, we have to evaluate, okay, with the isolated pawn, is possible to break the position, yes or not? If this is not possible, okay, we have to say, the black has to say that now the position for white is complicated, because the white cannot move the pawn on d5, and we can try with the black pieces to block the d5 square, and when he capture with the rook, and now we are going to keep the position of the pawn on d4 solid right now, but we will be preparing our position to establish the attack against the isolated pawn, okay? This is the reason, because when you have many pieces in the chessboard and you have the isolated pawn, the good condition in the middle game for you is to keep the pieces. But if you are playing against the isolated pawn, you need to simplify the pieces, okay? Because in the different end games, you will have a very good position playing against the isolated pawn. Anyway, the other idea, to continue, this is the position that they reach in the game. It's like Christopher got this position very well, and then let's see how he managed this small advantage, because the advantage with this type of position is strategically, okay? So if we can keep the position to the end game, so the position will be very easy and the pawn will be more complicated to be defended, okay? So the white play h3, bishop take h3, f3, bishop take f3, and queen a5, and now queen d2. Other option is to simply move the rook on this square on c2. But after queen c2, I don't know, knight b4. It's interesting, after knight b4, rook d8 and knight d5 is blocking the position. Other idea is rook c4, but after rook c4, capture. And here it's complicated because this capture is a mistake. After the rook goes attack the queen b2, bishop takes the knight, and after this capture, queen b3 and queen d3, and the rook b1 is inevitable, and you are lost. Okay, the black is lost because after rook b8, rook b1 is protecting everything. So the other idea is simple, rook c5, but rook c5, it's good position to simplify the game, okay? I think this is the best option instead to play with this isolated pawn. Because after this, queen capture a4, bishop takes c6, take on c6 and capture, and he can simply back the rook. Back the rook here, move the queen here, move the rook, and on c3, and all the weaknesses are defended. So this is the main problem in this position. So then after queen d2, so rook a to c8. Other option is simple, knight takes d4, because it's, I think it's tactic, okay? Bishop take, rook d8, and after rook d3, capture on d2, take on d2, and rook takes d4. And after this simplified position, rook d8, the black has, the white and black has exactly the same pawn structure, okay? With the material, but the plan for black, it's more easy because the black have a goal to attack, okay? If they move the bishop on g6 and rook d2, the attack against f2, it's forced, and then the white will be forced to defend with the rook on c1, okay? So this is the reason, because this position is not the best, but the truth is that it's not a mistake position. It's not a mistake in the variation. Anyway, instead that rook c8, he played rook c8, and after rook f to c1, instead rook f to c1, rook d1 is other idea. Simple knight takes d4, rook takes c8, knight take, and the queen is hanging. Or if he capture on d2, rook take f8 intermediate, capture, and the black is lost because the position for white has an extra rook. So that means that after rook on d1, the black doesn't have tactics. So then rook f to c1, and after rook f to c1, simple rook d8. Simple rook f to d8, okay? So rook c d8 is other possibility. It's interesting to make pressure against d4, but rook f is enough because the rook was not developed and was not active, basically. So rook d1 now. Here, an interesting possibility is bishop g5 attacking the knight, forcing rook f6, rook f8, bishop take, and after queen take d2, take on d2, take on c6, rook takes c6, and bishop take d4, bishop h6, rook b8, and after g4, well, this is exactly the same position that we studied before. The difference is the location of the rook. The rook is on b8 instead on d8, but the position is easy. The bishop will go back to b6, and it's necessary to try active the king. Other idea is simple, to move the bishop here on g7 if they want, but the key is that the white is in very good position. The black is not playing an easy game, okay? And the white has the possibility to improve, but it doesn't mean that the black is lost. So the black has opportunities too. But anyway, instead that, simple rook d1, and after rook d1, rook c7. The interesting move here is to play e5, because now the d file is pinned, the pawn on d4 is pinned, okay? If d5, simple e4 is attacking, so the black is winning material because it's attacking the rook on c3 that is hanging with the bishop on g7 and the queen on a5, okay? And the pawn on e4 at the same time is attacking the bishop. And you cannot capture his knight because the queen is hanging under the attack with the rook. So the other idea is bishop takes c6 immediately, instead moving d5, and after this pawn capture d4 immediately again because the pieces are under attack. c3 and e3. So after rook c2, capture, simple rook takes c6, bishop takes d4, and rook d6, and this game can finish in a draw. It's not complicated. So bishop c3, we simplify everything, and after that, I don't know, king here, and the black, it's moving the king to the center, very easy. So it's not complicated. The other idea, okay, it's rook c7. But after this rook c7, the plan for black is to try double the rooks, okay, attacking against the d4. After this rook d3, after this rook d3, and after rook d3, knight b4. Knight b4 is attacking and attacking. Okay, after rook c7, okay, to plan rook on d7, simple rook d3, and knight b4. Knight b4 is attacking d3 and attacking here. So other option is simplify the queen, capture, and knight b4, and after d5. This is the key. In this position, with the power of the two bishops, the white can sacrifice the pawn on d4, because the bishop on e3 is attacking on a7, and the bishop on f3 is attacking on b7. So we can simplify the positions in that way. For example, after e takes d5, a3, and when he moves, rook capture d5, and now we don't have the isolated pawn. This is one of the concepts that the player who used the Alapin variation against Sicilian knows very well. Because these guys who play the Alapin, they know that they should play d5 as quick as possible. It doesn't matter if in that position they get an equals possibility. After d5, the position is good because the white is not taking any risk. So instead so knight takes d5, simple, bishop takes d5, rook takes d5, take on d5, take on d5, and rook takes d5, and that's it. It's like this is an easy simplification of the game, so it's not complicated for black to play this position. Instead, this knight b4, and after rook c3, knight d5, okay? So it's like the knight is pinned right now, but it's not a big problem. So after rook takes c7, simple queen capture c7. If he play capture on d2, rook takes d2, knight takes c7, bishop takes b7, is winning an extra pawn, and that's it. It's a free pawn, and it's not compensation there. And at the same time, the white is playing with the power of the two bishops, okay? Instead that, queen captures c7, bishop to g5 attacking the rook, rook d7, and rook c1. And now queen b8. And this is a very good position because instead queen b8, imagine queen b6. With the queen b6, this is an interesting possibility because in this game, the bishop on g5 is protecting d8. So we can use rook c8 check, okay? He cannot move the rook on d8 because if he moves the rook on d8, we can simple capture because our bishop is protecting the rook. But after bishop f8, the key is that this is bad move because rook d8 is enough. So if you are thinking that with the pin you can force this checkmate, it's not easy because he can move the rook here and the queen is protecting the rook. But after bishop f8, we can, instead bishop h6, we can play bishop takes d5. Now it's different. Because after e takes d5 or rook takes d5, bishop h6, rook d8 again, so we have queen f4. And after queen f4, we are trying to pass the rook throughout the b8 and attacking against the bishop because the bishop is not doing anything there. And it's not possible for white to move the king because bishop h6 winning the piece, okay? So if he play f6, simple queen b8, and after rook f7, simple bishop h6 is winning. But if he move take on g5, we can simple get that checkmate in a forced way. After this check here, simple check, pawn g4, king h4, and this is made, okay? In that way, there are many options because the white has the material necessary to attack against the king. So that in that case is the rook and the queen, and with the couple pieces, it's possible to force the checkmate conditions, okay? The other idea is queen b8. Queen b8 is fantastic. I feel he's defending everything very well. And now a4 and simple queen f8. Bishop takes d5, rook takes d5. This is the reason, this is the time where I say, okay, this is a horrible move. Because it's like now he has the possibility to dominate your pawn on d4. And at the same time, the queen is able to move throughout this square. And the position is complicated for that. So after queen f8, simple bishop take d5, rook takes d5. E takes d5 is also good, but the difference is the type of structure. It's like, well, this could be isolated pawn in both cases, but it's not possible to be attacked, okay? And then the black cannot attack against the pawn on d4, the white cannot attack against the pawn on d5. So it's equals. But instead that, bishop take, rook takes d5, and now rook c7, okay? Working in the 7th rank. But the truth is that the black is basically hanging the pawn, takes d4, and after this queen c1, okay? So if he capture rook take b7, bishop take f2 doesn't work because after this capture, the queen can capture and you are not attacking anything. Probably you can capture this pawn, this bishop, but this is not the goal. So the idea is bishop f6, and after bishop f6, we make more pressure against the bishop on g5, and the queen is forced to be sacrificed with respect to the rook. It's like this capture, queen c8, and well, the game continue, but the key is that this is a good position for black. Yes, it's good position for black. The other idea is queen c1. Queen c1 was the move used in the game, but now the black only need to trade the pieces, because the black is playing with one extra pawn. It's like rook c5, and after rook c5, simple queen f4. So instead that, if rook take b7, simple bishop f6. Exactly. Queen c1, rook c5, offering the chain of the rooks, and the white simple play queen f4. That is a mistake. So if rook captures c5, queen captures c5, I think that queen capture and capture, probably king here, and it's possible to fight. Okay, this doesn't mean that you will be winning, because it's not possible. But the truth is that you can try to fight very, very good game, and this will be excellent position for both, because now the black player doesn't have material advantage. Okay, so instead that queen f4, but after queen f4, this is a blunder. It's a real blunder, because after bishop e5 is doing a fork. Okay, attacking, and the rook is lost. So queen e3, bishop take, and after bishop h6, queen d6, and after pawn g3, rook e5, and he will be trailing checkmate in few moves. Okay, so now he's really bad, because the white is playing with one rook down. So after queen f3, rook e1, and after this, queen d5, trailing the checkmate on h1 if the queen is moved to different location. Okay. Well, this is the game of the month. I hope that you understand everything and every idea, and please avoid the isolated pawn, because this is a complicated concept that is very, very difficult even for masters to play very well. Okay, so thank you very much for this edition, and I hope that you enjoyed the game. Subscribe if you have the option and you like the videos, and that's it. Okay, thank you very much, and see you in the next edition.